Welcome back to the Business Process Transformation Track. As a reminder, please send any questions you have to ecosystem@tradewindai.com. Up now, we have John Ferry from Trenchant and Analytics. So, John, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. And appreciate everybody joining us this morning, this afternoon. So I'm going to talk quickly through the Federal Acquisition System Transformation through Artificial Intelligence Mechanisms, or FAST-AIM. Really came up with the acronym and then worked backwards into the name. But really what we're focusing on here is applying sort of common sense artificial intelligence and machine learning to what is a fairly prolific acquisition challenge. And I think everyone in the acquisition community and really the operational end user community, the customer community for the acquisition workforce, will see that this is a problem that is near and dear to their heart, but maybe not the most snazzy problem for AI to solve. So what are we looking at? We are looking at the amount of time and manual effort that is required for requirements, solicitation, and contract development, right? So anyone from either the government side or the industry side who has been in contracting space for a little bit knows that from the very beginning where a government customer articulates a need, whether that's a piece of hardware or a service or even a commodity item, that the requirements development and iteration, articulation, codifying that into, say, the sources sought and the market research process through to the request for proposal, through source selection, and then contract negotiation award can be an extremely long process. And there have been iterations and innovations in the acquisition workforce and law to include middle tier acquisition that have helped alleviate some of those challenges for some particular types of acquisition. Nonetheless, even with those agile acquisition instruments, the time from requirements articulation, formal or informal, through contract award is easily over a year. And part of that challenge is the amount of manual effort that goes into that process. From the very beginning of a customer articulating their needs, it's largely done by hand, on paper, and iterated manually between participants in the process. And so what we're doing is really just taking some AI that is really well built, and it is really well attuned to the tasks of entity and data extraction, and text construction. So some really natural language processing components that are been in development and in use for years, and really applying them to this acquisition problem set so that we can accelerate the processes of acquisition. Not accelerating the acquisition process, right? Not cutting out steps, but really kind of creating a digital AI assistant for the acquisition workforce. And our intent there is to reduce the amount of manual effort, reduce the amount of mistakes that require rework, and really the big thing is reducing the amount of cost. The thing that is huge for me is whether you look at the number of people on the government side who develop requirements and solicitations and contracts, and the amount of labor hours and effort that go in on the government side, or the contractor capture and business development side of the house. The government bears almost 100% of that total cost. So if we can reduce those costs on both sides and accelerate the process, the government will get more supplies, services, and systems for a lower cost overall and much more quickly. So I've already talked a little bit about kind of the nature of the problem, but really this is the as-is process that folks understand and know and live through, right? The customer talks to the contracting officer or the program manager and says, hey, I need a thing. I need a person. I need a set of people. I need a service or a system, and here's what I need. And Often there's an iteration process where the customer might be very prescriptive, right? I need this specific thing, and through the proper due diligence, that PM or contracting officer has to kind of stop them and say, no, you need to describe what you need, right? You need to describe your requirement rather than prescribing your requirement. Tell me the capability you need. Tell me the kind of service you need. Don't tell me what you need somebody to do, or what specific piece of hardware you want, in most cases. And that is, standard business process. But it takes time. It takes iteration, and the more complex the capability, the longer it takes. And then from that point, regardless of how formal, informal that documentation happens to be, whether it's a capability development document, a capability production document, or even in the case of the Tradewinds OTA, capability, a call to industry. Those things have to be sort of identified and codified so the industry can respond to them, right? And again, once you move that over to the market research phase, the contracting office is interfacing with industry and trying to elicit an indication from industry of how they might respond to that requirement, right? Maybe they need to clarify the requirements. Maybe they need to be more or less specific, but there's an iteration process that is required to take place in that market research process. And again, there's the back and forth between the contracting officer and the industry. Again, it's time consuming. It's iterative. There's error prone processes involved, because again, it's very much manual. It's people's eyeballs and their brains transferring to their hands and creating content. Once you've done that market research, it goes into acquisition strategy. And there's, again, some limitations and input factors here, where the way that a contracting office might choose to go through a particular acquisition might be based on their experience, might be based on how their office prefers to do business. Maybe they really like agile acquisition, maybe they don't. And it's very dependent on the type of acquisition that's taking place, whether it's a service or a system or a supply. So there's iteration that takes place there between the customer and the contracting office, and there's some tension and back and forth of, the customer wants their capability likely as fast as possible, but the contracting officer has to go through the due diligence steps in order to get the thing properly. And then once the acquisition strategy is set, right, there's requests for quotes, there's blanket purchase agreements, there's commercial solutions offerings, OTAs, RFPs. There's a bunch of different ways that the government now has a lot of tools in their tool belt from an acquisition workforce that they could use to solicit that capability from industry. One way or another, it's going to go out, and industry is going to have a time to respond. Being on the industry side of things, I've seen every different thing under the sun. Oftentimes, there's legacy content in those RFPs or RFQs because it's a refresh from the last acquisition, or there's a template that an acquisition professional likes to use to accelerate their processes. And the more it seems for me, the more acceleration we try to get into that by reusing content and recycling content to get documents out faster, to get solicitations out faster. The more often industry has questions that go back during the question and answer period. The contracting office often has to then issue modifications to the solicitation, which complicates things, can extend the solicitation period. And so again, that those manual processes imbue sort of error cases into that process. And then, once industry gets their proposal together, they push forward their bid. And then again, the customer and the contracting office have to go through the very long, arduous source selection process. They have to read every single proposal. Out of a 150-page proposal, some of them may just be completely disqualified because they're non-compliant. But you have to read them all the way through to find out ahead of time, right? So there's very few, if any, source selection shortcuts. You have to do the manual process of reading and digesting those proposals in order to give a fair and equitable chance to every proposer. Again, it's a very time consuming manual process, and there's always a time pressure. The customer always wants that source selection process to take place as fast as possible so they can get the capability that they want. And then finally, contract award. Similar deal with that is the solicitations. There's statements of works. The statement of work goes in from the government side, the proposal goes in from the industry side, and then there's negotiation that takes place in the middle. All of which is bound by reality, right? And so there's a machination that goes on in the contract award process. And again, contracts get awarded. There's sometimes errors that then have to be modified, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line is that this process is very long, it's very time consuming, and it's very manual. And so using some basic, well built, well tested, industry standard AI tools like extract, transform, load pipelines, natural language processing, natural language composition, um, we can automate, or at least semi-automate, a lot of these processes. So this is our vision for the future, right? Where the requirements collection can be standardized. The end user can articulate their requirements and their needs, and they can do that iteratively with an intelligent agent, right? We've all kind of gone onto websites or you go to your bank website and there's a little helper bot that does some very structured back and forth. That's a sort of a first wave AI tool, the sort of structured response back and forth. But those structured rule based tools can very quickly work an end user through articulating their requirements in a descriptive way rather than a prescriptive way. That initial iteration cycle that's typically between a customer and a contract shop or a program manager, we can put an AI agent in the middle to accelerate that process and free up the PMs and the contracting officers to focus on their program management and their contract execution requirements. The other thing that does is it puts those requirements into a structured data set. And the key here, you've probably heard it a number of times, the new gold in the DoD landscape and the federal landscape across really every landscape is data, and getting structured, standardized data to feed back into your analytics, to feed back into your processes, to feed back into your models. And so one of the keys here is at every phase, we are capturing data in a standardized format. And so starting with that first step, capturing those requirements is incredibly important because it informs future acquisitions at a strategic level. It may allow decision makers to make capability or cost trade-offs, as acquisition professionals often have to do. So capturing those requirements in a standardized format enables better decision making across the enterprise. So those requirements flow into what we're looking to build as a requirements and a project's dashboard. So if you're a program manager or you're a contracting officer, but really if you're a program manager and you have requirements across your user community, whether it's services or systems, you have a finite amount of resources and you have an amount of capability that you need to deliver. And so having those requirements filtered up and organized into a dashboard where you can rank and prioritize and make some game planning decisions against those requirements, collate them up and consolidate them so you can see where requirements overlap or diverge. Just gives you a nice, clean visual of your overall program needs. And again, that prioritization that a program manager can do then should go into a data set, right? What things met above the line or went below the line? Some of these things are sort of standard knowledge management tasks. From year to year, from FIDIP to FIDIP, what things went above or below the line, and how do we keep track of those things? Oftentimes, those are currently tracked with spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks. So how do we get that into a more data-centric perspective. Again, those priorities can then get moved over. The things that go above the line can start moving into automated solicitation or RFI, source selection document generation. So if a contract office uses standardized sort of formats, which most of them often do, for their sources sought and RFI processes for those market research steps, those priorities can automatically be flowed up. The articulated requirements can get converted into statements of work in those RFI documents and get semi-automated, so that rather than a program manager cutting and pasting articulated requirements into a statement of work and then building that into an RFI or a sources sought or even a solicitation, it can be done semi-automatically, so that rather than starting from a 50% product or a 0% product, you can start from a 95% product. And all the KO has to do is that finishing work to really put the touches on it before they publish it. And whether that's a sources sought, an RFI, or the solicitation, the process can be the same. And in that step, you can do iteration, where you push out the RFI, you get responses back, you process the responses, and then you push out the solicitation. Then you move into solicitation review, right? AI has become very good at text decomposition and natural language processing. So while you cannot be absolved of going through each of the proposals that come back for your solicitation, at the very least, an AI can go through and review it for simple things like compliance and identify that because of a set number of, or a set of rules, it identifies that these 10 proposals may be non-compliant because of XYZ, and very quickly allow a contracting officer or a contract specialist to orient to those potentially non-compliant items, take a look, review whether or not it's non-compliant, and those 10 solicitations might be disqualified right off the bat, right? And it saves that long process of going all the way through the proposal. Again, those responses can go down into a solicitation data set. The responses can go back down into a proposals data set. And so looking at the data structure as a capability unto itself, when you're going back to do market research, you already have a data set of potential sources that you might want to talk to about a particular capability, because you've already decomposed and stored data on those potential offers. Next one over, talk through the proposal review and triage. That moves into automated contract generation. So you move in, you've reviewed the proposal, you extract a lot of the important content, and that can move over into your statement of work for your contract. Again, you're not starting from zero, you're starting from, say, 95%, and then the contracting officer just adds the last 5% to that contract. So that's the grand vision. Where we're starting is with the Tradewinds OTA. We're looking to automate their OTA process. So starting with the call to industry, taking the AI needs statement, decomposing it, putting it into a requirements data set, composing that into a semi-automated call to industry that a contracting officer can then finish and publish to the Tradewinds AI OTA site. Then going through industry responses, we can have the AI then analyze and triage the responses, provide that analysis to the KO and the PM and the customer, and then help them through their source selection process. Now, this is the vision. We're right here at about the middle. We're about to demonstrate that automated call to industry generation. We've got some really great results thus far, and we're actually building the end user front end. So the user interface, which will be a nice smooth interface that walks through that need statement through solicitation workflow and standardizes and digests that data at every step. So here's where we are, and then here's where we're going, right? This is the next phase is building out the entire acquisition pipeline, regardless of the type of acquisition required, and what kind of customers, services, systems, etc., need to be acquired. We're starting small with OTAs and growing up to the larger acquisition ecosystem. And that completes my 20-minute brief. I am open for comments, questions, engagement, collaboration, etc. I really look forward to completing this project and continuing to innovate and iterate on DoD acquisition modernization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. This is the end of our business process presentations. We'll be having a closing remarks session at 12:20 hosted by Dave Angeletti. So I'll be closing this one down. See you on the other side.